The Bible's description of heaven sounds alien. Imagine a whirlwind of fire roaring out of the north. Inside it, a massive cloud, glowing with an otherworldly light. At its very center, you see something like gleaming white-hot metal. Then things get really strange. From the heart of the fire, 4 living creatures emerge. Each one has 4 faces and 4 wings. And next to them, on the ground, are wheels. A wheel inside another wheel covered from top to bottom in eyes. For more than 2,500 years, this passage from the book of Ezekiel has been seen as a profound, symbolic vision of God's glory. It's a cornerstone of theology, a stunning picture of the sheer majesty of heaven. But what if it wasn't a vision at all? What if the prophet Ezekiel wasn't describing a peek into the spiritual realm, but a literal encounter with something not from around here? Section 1. The Prophet and the Puzzle. To get to the bottom of this, we have to understand the man who wrote it down. Ezekiel was a priest, living with his fellow Israelites in exile in Babylon around the 6th century BCE. Times were tough. Jerusalem had been sacked, the sacred temple was gone, and the people felt like their God had completely abandoned them. It was in this moment of crisis, standing by a river, that Ezekiel had his vision. Now, the idea of a God riding a chariot wasn't new. Ancient cultures all over the Near East showed their gods on celestial chariots as a symbol of power. So, when theologians look at Ezekiel's account, they see it in that context. The 4 faces, a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, are said to represent all of creation. The wheels that can go in any direction without turning, that's God's omnipresence. He's everywhere at once. The eyes covering the wheels, his omniscience. He sees all. For centuries, this has been the accepted take. It's a theophany, a divine vision so overwhelming, so alien to our senses, that it perfectly captures God's magnificent otherness. The whole point was to send a message to the exiles. God hasn't forgotten you. His glory isn't stuck in the ruins of the temple. It's mobile, all-powerful, and it's right here with you in Babylon. But then, humanity learned how to fly. We built rockets and traveled to space. And a new generation started reading Ezekiel's words, not as theologians, but as engineers. And they didn't see a chariot. They saw a machine. Section 2. The Case for an Ancient Encounter. The idea that the Bible might be describing alien technology is the core of ancient astronaut theory. It's a fringe theory, to be sure, but it exploded in popularity in the 60s and 70s, mostly thanks to authors like Erich von Däniken and his book, Chariots of the Gods. He argued that many biblical miracles were really just encounters with advanced beings, misunderstood by early humans. When you look at Ezekiel's vision through that lens, the details suddenly seem different. First, the landing. Ezekiel describes a stormy wind, a great cloud, and flashing fire. To a theorist, that's not God's symbolic presence. That's the textbook description of a vehicle entering the atmosphere, kicking up dust and debris as it comes in for a landing. The gleaming metal sounds a lot like a ship's fuselage. And what about the living creatures? The description is wild. 4 faces, 4 wings, calf-like feet shining like bronze. Theologians say it's symbolism. Theorists ask, what if it's a literal, practical description? Maybe the 4 faces aren't faces at all, but 4 sides of a helmet, fitted with sensors, visors, and breathing apparatus. Maybe the wings aren't biological, but mechanical arms or parts of a flight pack. But the most compelling piece of the puzzle for many is the wheels. Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel, able to move in any direction without turning, baffled people for ages. That is, until the 20th century. Suddenly, that design looked uncannily like modern concepts for omnidirectional or gyroscopic propulsion systems. In fact, one man was so intrigued he patented a version of it. That man was Joseph F. Blumrich, a respected engineer from NASA's Systems Layout Branch. In 1974, Blumrich set out to scientifically debunk the ancient astronaut theory. He figured his expertise in spacecraft design would make it easy, but the deeper he dug into the text, the more his opinion changed. He didn't just fail to disprove the theory, he became one of its biggest supporters. Blumrich concluded that Ezekiel was describing a spacecraft with stunning technical accuracy, from its main body and helicopter-like rotors to its retractable landing gear. The eyes on the wheels? He suggested they could be sensors, lights, or even a kind of textured, pressure-sensitive tread. He laid it all out in his book, The Spaceships of Ezekiel. The ultimate skeptic had become a believer. Section 3. Broadening the scope. Not an isolated incident. If Ezekiel really did have a close encounter, it begs the question, was it a one-off event? According to ancient astronaut theorists, not even close. They argue the Bible is packed with stories that, when you read them as tech manuals instead of holy texts, paint a picture of sustained extraterrestrial contact. Look at the story of Elijah. The Bible doesn't say he died, it says he ascended. A chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. To believers, it's a miracle. To a theorist, a fiery whirlwind-like ascension sounds an awful lot like a rocket launch. Then there's the mysterious Book of Enoch. It's not in the official biblical canon, but its influence is seen in the New Testament, with the Book of Jude even alluding to its prophecies. In the text, Enoch is taken to the heavens by beings called the Watchers. They teach him cosmic secrets, advanced astronomy, and the future of humanity. Theorists connect these Watchers to the same beings Ezekiel saw, acting as guides for early humankind. Even Moses on Mount Sinai gets a second look. He's up on the mountain for 40 days, surrounded by fire and smoke. When he comes down, his face is glowing so brightly, he has to wear a veil. Was he just in God's presence? Or was he aboard a radiant craft, maybe exposed to radiation, receiving instructions? Proponents of the theory argue that the Ark of the Covenant itself, with its very specific and dangerous handling instructions, wasn't just a holy box, but a piece of alien tech, a power source perhaps, or a communication device. When you line these stories up, a pattern seems to emerge. Otherworldly beings, fiery ships, chosen people taken aboard for training, and the transfer of advanced knowledge. Could it be that Ezekiel's vision is just the most detailed account of a phenomenon that was happening all over the ancient world? Section 4. The scholarly counterpoint and the enduring mystery. Of course, the vast majority of biblical scholars, historians, and archaeologists think this theory is nonsense. They argue that seeing spaceships in these texts is just us projecting our modern world onto the ancient one. Scholars point out that Ezekiel wasn't writing in a vacuum. Winged creatures and divine thrones were everywhere in the art and myths of the ancient Near East, especially in Babylon, where he was living. He was speaking a symbolic language his audience would have instantly understood. He was showing them that his God was more powerful than the gods of their enemies. This vision also became the foundation of a profound school of Jewish mysticism called Merkabah. For these mystics, the goal wasn't a physical trip to the stars, but a spiritual journey inward to understand the nature of God. Critics argue that the ancient astronaut theory strips these incredibly rich texts of their history, their culture, and their meaning. It ignores the whole point of the story, which was to give hope to a people in crisis. They'd say the prophet himself told us what he saw, a vision of the glory of the Lord, not a close encounter of the third kind. And yet, the mystery won't quite go away. The descriptions are just so specific, so mechanical, that they continue to fire up our imagination. The story of Joseph Blumrich, the NASA engineer who tried to debunk the theory and ended up convinced by it, remains a fascinating, unshakable footnote in the whole debate. Conclusion. So we're left with two incredible possibilities. Was the prophet Ezekiel, in a moment of spiritual ecstasy, given a symbolic vision of God's glory, using the language of his time to describe something beyond words? A theological masterpiece meant to comfort his people? Or did a man in the ancient world, with only the words he knew, try his best to describe a piece of technology so advanced it seemed divine? Did he witness the landing of a ship from another world, piloted by beings who looked like gods? Whether it was a message from God or a visitor from the stars, Ezekiel's vision forces us to question what we think we know about the past. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the oldest stories ask the most modern questions. The answer really just depends on whether you look up at the sky with the eyes of faith or the eyes of an explorer. What's your take? Was Ezekiel describing a divine chariot or an ancient spaceship? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into history's greatest mysteries.